Welcome to the Bland Podcast.
Grab yourself a coffee, are you ready? Enjoy and make it last. If you're out on the town or just hanging around, it's the Bland Campfire Podcast. We'll sit around the fire telling stories with a marker in our hands. Sipping it slow, hope you're ready to go. It's the Bland Campfire Podcast.
So this is a poem from my collection Urbane, and it is called Movies. Movies. They are every place. The screen always there to look at like a moon over the landline. The first time I went to one I was very little. I gnawed candied lips, ladybird heart trilling against sternum's shiver. It was cold, but I took my cardigan off. The little girl next to me, a stranger in the way little girls are the moment before they're smitten from proximity, could not talk. She skated her finger up and down my skinny pink arm as the lights went away. She did not stop the whole movie, her soft cherish. When I woke in the car, the streetlights were fizzing, my tongue was sore, and I thought I'd dreamed her. I did not ask. I wept with no sound on in the back seat. Later, the third boy ever to say that he loved me was 20 years out of sync. I had been here for more birthdays than bylines, and yet after he said it, the lights on the water flickered different. The skyline showed me its sock feet. It's funny how much home feels more like the movies when somebody loves you just for being in it.
Welcome to the Blend Podcast. Today I'm going to have a conversation with Rebecca Baird. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We've not been here for a while, so it's good to get back here. We're recording this currently in Blend in Dundee, so there is some background noise. You will keep hearing some traffic in the back, which I'll try and mute out. But it is difficult when you're getting people. But it gives it a bit of authenticity, and so if you guys don't mind. But yeah, welcome, Rebecca. I've never met you before.
No.
Your name came up because one of our staff said, "Oh, she sounds interesting. You could get to speak here." So I hear you're known as the cinnamon Dolce lady.
Yeah. So when I first started coming in here, that's all I would order all the time is cinnamon Dolce. And then one time I went up to the counter and one of the guys was just like, "The cinnamon Dolce girl." So that's how I got to know Blend.
It is one of our ways of identifying customers because we rarely get to know names. So you generally, it's a term of affection really that most people are identified by their drink.
I loved it. It was very
so
sweet.
So that tends to be in the back track. So well done. You're in the circle if you're being talked about for your drink. You know, so how did you discover us? I mean,
so I used to go to the coffee shop across the road.
Yeah.
And then I saw that this one had all these fairy lights in it. And I was like, I'm a moth to a flame. So I was like, I love a fairy light. I'm going to go in there. And you just captured me and I never left. Because it's such a nice place.
Are you from Dundee or where?
I'm originally from Falkirk, but I've been in Dundee for about 7 years now.
Right.
So,
what brought you to Dundee?
So, first of all, I left Falkirk to go to Glasgow because when I was 18, I had this mad notion that I was going to be an astrophysicist.
Whoa.
Right. Which I don't know if you can, you shouldn't stereotype. I don't know if you can tell from the way I'm dressed. I'm not an astrophysicist.
I wouldn't know what one looked like, and there's no reason why you couldn't be.
But, anyway, I went and studied astronomy and physics in Glasgow for 2 years, and then I pretty much met my mathematical ceiling and was like, yeah, no, there's 3 variables in the calculus, I can't do this anymore. So I switched universities, courses, careers into English and creative writing and came to University of Dundee to do that. And yeah, I loved it. I did my undergrad, I stayed for my master's, and now I work here as a journalist.
As a journalist? Are you with one of the local papers or a publishing house?
Just at DC Thomson.
Oh, right, cool.
So yeah, I mostly work on the Courier.
Okay, cool. And astrophysics to creative writing, where was the link?
It sounds really unrelated, but it's all about seeing how things work and the story that we tell ourselves. Like, physics is just the story that you tell yourself about the universe. So I'm just not very good with numbers, it turns out. So I'm better with words.
Do you know, there's an interesting story. Jeff Bezos, in one of his podcasts, I can't remember which one, shared the story about how he wanted to be an I don't think it was astrophysics, but it was something to do with cosmology or space, and that's what he was studying. And he said, and he was wanting to be the best. He's a highly driven guy, he wanted to do that. And he had a roommate who was Sri Lankan, and apparently some professor gave them a paper, and this roommate solved this problem in like less than half an hour. And the rest of them were spending like a week trying to get close to this. And eventually they couldn't, and the Sri Lankan, whatever, got the prize that was there for the test. And Jeff Bezos realized that he'll never be, he hit his ceiling. And he said that there are just people going to be far cleverer than me, always, in this field. And that's why he changed his field and ended up being who he is now. But, so... yeah, it's not.
Man,
it's not
I
always
wish Jeff Bezos had been a physicist, a mediocre physicist.
Well, there you go.
But no, I get it's one of those things. I love. It was taking the love out of it for me. So I was like, I'd rather just be amazed than be miserable.
Yeah. So what do you do now then? What are you involved
in? So, as I said, I'm a journalist. That's my sort of 9 till 5. So. Recently, I've been covering arts and entertainment, which has been really fun locally, and then currently I'm working as a columnist, which means I just get to spew my thoughts and get money, which is
printed blog,
which is pretty great. But outside of work, I guess I'm a poet and a writer creatively, and I've just a couple of weeks ago, I actually released my first collection.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty exciting.
Is that published? Or,
yeah, so you can get it, speaking of Jeff Bezos, you can get it on Amazon. Yeah. And it's called Urbane.
Can you spell that?
It's like urban, but with an E at the end.
Okay. And what's that about?
So I'm going to consult my notes for this, because what is it even about? So, it's kind of about cities, specifically about Dundee, but urbane means charming, or well put together. And I really like the word charming because it makes me think of magic, like charms and spells and things like that. And I come from a rural part of Falkirk. It's quite pastoral, lots of fields and trees and stuff. And I think when we think of fairy tales, we think of pastoral places like that. But I had this idea that cities have this magic, and there could be little creatures, little friendly fairy tale creatures in cities. And if there was, what would they look like and what would they sound like?
Yeah. If humans were drawn to cities, why aren't fairies?
Exactly. Why wouldn't they come too? So I thought that I was writing about that, but it ended up being a lot more of my own experience of cities with a little bit of magic thrown in.
Oh, cool. That sounds exciting. We will get you to read something from that as well. So
sounds fun.
Look forward to that. Yeah. And what's your passion with poetry? What's that about?
What is my passion for poetry? I think it's the same as sort of my passion for pop music and songs. I think that there's something about having a universal truth or something that a lot of people can relate to boiled down into a tiny amount of words. And there's something about a fragment of someone's life or experience or fragment of a story that it feels like you're peeking into something and you've got a glimpse of something magic again. Rather than, I love novels, I love long form really as well, but I don't know, something about poetry and songs, it's just that little snapshot really appeals to me.
You distill the idea or the thought or the little window into something. I suppose it's interesting. It probably relates to your maths even, just trying to create purity from complexity,
trying to find the that answer, like the one answer to an experience or something like that, trying to distill it down, like you said. But I also really like sound, like the sounds of words and rhythm and things like that. So yeah, I think poetry's a lot more fun because there's no narrative rules in poetry. You can actually do whatever you like.
Are you drawn to any particular poets or any?
So probably like a lot of people in my generation, I got into poetry through spoken word videos on YouTube. And one of my favourite poets is Sabrina Benham, who she wrote the poem, the famous one that she wrote is Explaining My Depression to My Mother, a conversation. And it's a beautiful, very like moving spoken word piece. But she has so much like whimsy in her pieces as well, and that's something that I really admired, was that she was able to take things that were quite difficult and vulnerable and she makes them seem quite light. So I really admire her. As for like written poets, if that's what you'd want to call it, I really love Eileen Myles. I think my favourite poem ever is a poem called Peanut Butter by Eileen Myles. It's just beautiful.
Give us a line if you remember.
I'm trying to think of that. There's some not family friendly lines. So I'm trying to think of a line that is family friendly. She has a bit that says, "I'm immoderately in love with you, knocked out by all your new white hair," which I just think's a great line.
Fab.
Immoderately in love.
Immoderately.
It's so good.
No, cool. So how do you? You're in journalism. I mean, what is? I mean, it sounds a bit blasé, but what is journalism? Like, in my head, I've always had this idea that someone who reports, goes and finds a story and brings it back, but that doesn't seem to be what happens nowadays.
It does sometimes. There's lots of occasions, like when you're in a newsroom, that people are, going out and talking to people in their community and finding stories, or, someone sends in a tip. That still happens.
No.
It happens more over DM now rather than like someone phoning up and being like, "Hey, say, I got a tip for you." But no, that still happens. I think journalism now is very complicated because it's kind of undergoing an identity crisis at the minute. I don't think it really knows what it is. It used to just be about, I guess, exposing things, and it still has to do that to a certain extent, but I also think that there's a lot more responsibility on journalists towards their subjects now, which I think is a good thing. And also with the rise of like digital journalism, it used to be about breaking a story and getting there first, and I don't think that that's necessarily the biggest priority, or it shouldn't be the biggest priority now. I think it's about telling the story in a way that is respectful and true, factual, and that actually has the human interest at its heart. Whereas I think for a long time, particularly when you look at the papers from the 90s and the early 2000s when I was growing up, journalism was really exploitative. And I think it's good that we're collectively as a society kind of condemning that now and saying that's not what we want from this.
Where do you, I mean, you're particularly about arts and entertainment. What's that window that you see now in Scotland or in Dundee or?
Well, I came into it at a weird time because it was a pandemic and everything was closed, and I saw everything open back up and then close again. So that was very strange. I think the window that I've seen is that a sad truth is that a lot of people care more about famous people than the people around them, which we already know. But a surprising amount of people do care about the art that is happening on their doorstep. And I think that was like a pleasant surprise to me, was that, obviously you're a local paper and you know that people care about local issues, but I could write about, so, like this cafe is always full of artists. I could come in here and take my pick of people to talk to, and sometimes I did. and those stories did get readers. People did care. And, you know, artists are very sensitive people, and I think that people would, I'd say, you know, I do arts and entertainment journalism, and they'd think it was very glamorous. I'm like, I do local arts and entertainment journalism. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. And even the famous ones, even the very few famous people that I got to talk to, people just want you to be nice to them. I think that, you know, there's a reputation around arts and like showbiz journalism that everyone's going to be very cagey and snooty, and I didn't find that.
Yeah.
And if you're nice to people, they were pretty much nice to you.
They're still trying to express just who they are, and I mean, and where do you find it? Where do you find art entertainment right now in culture? We're so used to YouTube and all this. So what's the local scene look like? Or what is
so many museums and galleries around here. I mean, you've got the McManus, you've got the V&A, you've got Perth Museum, you've got Kirkcaldy Galleries. Like, I could go on and on and on. And every single one of those, you could go in, and if you spent a day, you wouldn't see everything. Not really. You wouldn't really see it. So that's like the first place to start if you'd like to sort of see more of your own local art. The other thing I'd say is online. Just connecting with pages of people that you don't necessarily know, but you know they're in your area. People are doing loads of cool stuff. Yeah. Particularly in theatre as well. With the Dundee Rep and Pitlochry Festival Theatre, Whitehall Theatre, all of these amazing places round about. There's so much that happens. I found it hard to cover everything because there was so much going on.
And I think that's genuinely, I think that's one of the issues I struggle with. Like, part of this cafe was to try create a bit of that bohemia, you know. I mean, I went to art college in Dundee and studied architecture here, so it was one of the best parts of my life of just being surrounded by creativity, you know. And then as you go into sort of professional work or normal work or life, you actually get detached from that. You don't meet artists anymore. You don't see the bohemia. You don't see, and we've also sterilized it in many ways. Like, we put it in galleries, we put it in theaters or concert halls or wherever, and we lose that space of being able to interact, like just a busker or something. The place of delight where you're going into a place and used to, you know, the pub folk musician in a pub. You just walk in and to eat or drink or whatever, but you're also seeing this other insight into the world. And I just wonder how we get back into some of that again. You know, like, how does culture allow us access to art and creativity?
I think that part of the problem with it, particularly in a place like Dundee where everyone knows everyone, is, particularly for Scottish people, we've all got major cringe. We don't like seeing artists in the flesh, in our own spaces, because it makes us embarrassed to see someone being vulnerable.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I say we don't like it. Obviously, I like it. But I think as a culture, we have become so used to seeing art through a screen that we don't like it when it appears in real life because it challenges us. And I think that maybe as well because of COVID, because we've not really seen each other in real life for so long, I don't know, it feels a bit strange. But I do think that places like this, and, you know, I could shout out loads of spots.
Yeah, I mean, say that, because some of our listeners, you know, they'll be, especially this post-lockdown period, I think people are looking for the things that is delight again. So what does that look like? Where should people go?
What's the place called? The Hunter S. Thompson. The basement of that always has great gigs.
Where's that then?
It's on Perth Road.
Okay.
It's a pub. You go in, it doesn't look like it has a downstairs, but it does. Okay. And yeah, I've seen loads of great bands play down there. I think the place that used to be called Conroy's Basement, and it's not now, Rad Apples, also has good downstairs for music. For visual art, I really, really love Catherine Rattray Gallery, which is at Meadow Mill. I think what people don't understand about independent galleries, and I didn't either until I was, a journalist that was invited in, is that they're open to the public unless it says they're not.
Yeah.
And you do not have to buy anything.
I think that's the big barrier, isn't it? This idea, this sort of subliminal snobbery implied that, if you can afford it, come in.
Yeah.
Rather than come and enjoy this.
And I think that gallery owners are recognising that as well, because I've seen a lot of little signs in independent galleries recently saying, come in and browse. So I think that, people recognise that that's a barrier. But I don't know, I think open mics and things like that, it's the same thing. People will only go if they want that bohemia, and the people that don't want it won't go. So those are quite safe spaces.
Yeah, it's true. And that's a good way of looking at it, that you're going to find your tribe when you come out anyway, so that's okay, and sometimes, but there's also a challenge in that, I suppose, that of ones where, like, I'm conscious myself that when you're looking at stuff just online, it's a distilled version that you're seeing, and it's constantly, you're just seeing the sort of the best of the best, or the cleaned up act. Whereas sometimes you've just got to watch the plant, the tree grow almost. Just watch some of the raw and be able to distill for yourself, or discern for yourself what's good or bad.
I agree. I think that a great thing that's maybe come out of the pandemic for a lot of people is that people go places alone more. I would say, anecdotally, I know a lot more of my friends that would go somewhere alone, because they're used to their own company now. And I think that I've never not done that. Like, I love going places by myself. So I think that that's a great way to take in that kind of bohemia, because I think that a lot of the time, if you go with, a big group of people, you can be self-conscious when taking in art, because it's such a personal thing. But if you go on your own, then you don't have to worry about that, and you can just kind of enjoy it.
It's interesting. But one of the ideas behind Blend, and we used to talk about it nearly 10 years ago now, was how do you create these safe spaces in our communities? How do you, in the traditional culture, say in say European or certainly British culture, was the pub was the warmest room in the village. You knew as a stranger coming into a space that you could get fed, water your horse, sleep the night if you need, and there may be music and entertainment, and everyone's a stranger to an extent. So, and we seem to have lost those spaces in our culture. We've sterilized a lot of these spaces, and actually part of the whole sort of ethos behind this cafe was to try recreate those spaces, and we sort of see, they've been successful, I think, because of that, because suddenly it doesn't matter if you're on your own, you're welcome. You just come in, and then tag into whatever is happening. And I just wonder if businesses begin to realize that the value of that, or even gallery owners, that it is actually these connection spaces and the safety of the spaces that actually make more sense to people.
I absolutely agree. I think this is the only cafe that I've ever come into where people, like, the general feeling is that it's okay to sit at someone else's table. Like, if it's really busy and, someone will come over and just say, like, oh, is anyone sitting there? Can I sit there? And I don't know anywhere else that I've ever been that people would do that. And I don't know how you have done that, though.
Intentionally. Well, I mean, and I know we laugh, but it genuinely, I mean, when you look at our long table, the long table was right there at the beginning of the design because it was to try create the long table. It's like, how do you create that space where strangers can sit there and not feel uncomfortable, but actually in the discomfort, if there is any, find delight. Find the it's weird how I'm quite an introvert, surprisingly. Didn't come across it, but I came to this country as I was 18-year-old student, came to Dundee, and Dundee was a culture shock on many levels in the early 90s. And for me, there was a church community that I used to get involved in, but that was the point. Like, you found a community to go into as a stranger and get involved in and be welcomed in. And when certainly Blend Dundee was sort of coming into into an idea. That was like my gift, gift back to the city to go. We need those spaces. What happens to these strangers? And they're not just students or just elderly, or it's just people. We've become these disconnected, lonely generation. That we have to create these intentional spaces where a stranger isn't danger. Yeah.
I think that's part of it, right? Because we're kind of hyper aware because we're just overstimulated all the time of all the possible dangers that other humans can pose to us, right? Says the journalist. But I think that, yeah, it's creating a space where niceness is the baseline as well. Like, no one comes in here, if someone comes in here and is rude, they are glared out. Softly, sweetly glared out, because it's not the vibe, do you know what I mean? Yeah. But I feel like what you said about community is really important, because I think when I was growing up, community was more like a buzzword that I heard politicians use, and we didn't really understand what it meant beyond knowing your neighbours. But it's what you said, it's finding like your people, which shouldn't, it's literally the meaning of the word. It shouldn't be a revelation, but it kind of was.
Yeah, no, good. How was your lockdown?
I loved lockdown. I know that's probably bad. Apart, like, obviously, disclaimer, like, I did not love the pandemic and all the bad things happening to people. Yeah. But I had the privilege of being able to kind of detach from that most days. I loved it. I felt like it was a break. I had been on like this constant progression of like assignment to degree to job to promotion, and I was so happy to just be told you have to sit still now and you can't make any progress.
A rest, a pause.
A pause. It was great. And I went home to my parents' house for the first lockdown, and that was the longest I'd been home since I moved away when I was 18. And it was just really nice. I got to like hang out with hang out with my parents, get fed, walk the dog. So I had a great time.
No, it's true. I mean, I felt guilty because I had a great lockdown, you know, and in some ways it's actually, I've had to unpack a bit of that because I got used to it, you know. I got used to walking the dog and just being with my family and not needing to meet anybody, or, you know, and at the same time, realizing also like maybe that's not a great thing.
Yes, I found the second one very challenging. I have to say, I feel like I coped. I like thrived in the first one, and then the second one just did me in. It wasn't good, but I think, I think that first one was probably a welcome pause for a lot of people.
Yeah, good, especially in a world of just intensity. It was a good rest point and a good.
And I feel like what we were saying about people, you know, kind of being a bit more vulnerable and like that community spirit, that happened virtually over lockdown. Like, people were like showing their art that I didn't even know that they did. And people were like having Zoom sessions where they were singing songs, and I was like, this is amazing. Why are we not doing this in real life?
Yeah. So why aren't we? Why do you think we're not brought some of that back? Because all the noise came back, and all the scheduling and busyness and train times and responsibilities. Yeah. No, that's a good way of putting it. The noise came back. We used to have someone used to organize open mics in our Perth shop, and there was poetry of sort of once a month, and it was just great. It was just raw and edgy and impressive. It was just so nice to see in Scotland a poetry scene. Yeah. You know, which just doesn't sort of ring normal. You know.
No, I think it is one of those weird ones where poetry scenes can be hard, because a lot of people that find themselves in poetry are people that haven't found themselves anywhere else, right? So it's often like a group of misfit toys, which I love about it. Yeah. But that identity, weirdly, becomes quite excluding to a lot of other people who maybe don't see themselves that way, who, you know, aren't maybe off the wall or very
or
raw.
recovering, or
yeah, you know what I mean.
or, yeah,
People that aren't actively hurting, like you said, they maybe don't see themselves there, and there is a bit of gatekeeping sometimes around that. If like you're not a real poet if you're not in pain. You're not a real poet if you're not starving. Yeah. How dare you have a 9-to-5 job and call yourself a poet? You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but
that's interesting. Yeah.
And then there's another kind of scene I find in Scotland that is Scots poetry, which is super joyful and happy, but it is what it says. It's poetry in Scots, which I'm not involved in.
Where's that then? I mean, where do you?
I see a lot of it online. I think there's quite a big scene for that in Glasgow.
When you say Scots, as in Gaelic and
Scots dialect,
Scots dialect,
usually.
And why is that joyful then? What
I feel like that scene is very because I think, I could be wrong because I'm not an expert, but I think that scene is much more about like reclaiming a language and an identity that has been kind of dormant, and having fun with it, like infusing it with youth, which I think makes it quite joyful. People that do that kind of poetry seem like they're having a great time. But again, it's divisive. A lot of people say, you know, you're putting that on, or there's a lot of posturing about what it means to be Scottish, and there's a whole, you know, it's fraught. What I'm trying to say is I think poetry scenes can be very fraught.
Right.
But I think that when you find like-minded people, or when you're just when you don't try and fit into a scene and you just write what you're writing or say what you're saying, people respond to that very warmly, usually. And you don't have to have like this persona or identity or niche to be part of it, but it does from the outside sometimes seem like you do.
Well, Rebecca, thanks for this conversation. I mean, if someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way of connecting with you?
Probably Instagram. Okay. So I'm at Grammarpoose, so like glamour but with grammar.
Oh,
so I can give you that
sure.
handle.
Yeah, I'll put that on the show links.
That's probably the best place to get me.
Well, so Glamopus. Okay, great.
But thank you.
No, thank you. It's been great to just meet you and get to know you a bit more, and we'll do more. And I heard you've got a podcast yourself. Or?
So me and my best friend Emily, we co-host a books and literature and media podcast called Infatuated, cool. Which we just come on and it's basically we save up all of the things we want to tell each other about the things we're watching and reading, and then we tell each other on a podcast.
It's a book club podcast without
but we don't read the same books.
So
it's really fun.
I'm passionate about books, so that's one of the things we want to look in as part of books and coffee as well. So watch the space, you know.
Amazing.
No, fab. Great, thank you.
And I'll do one more.
Yeah,
cool.
That's fine.
This is probably my favourite one, and it's called Paris. Paris. There is an observatory up on the hill. I want to go there, but never do. Like Paris. I want someone new to take me to it. There are so few places left here for me to discover love in. In this place, my place, I'm always the one showing. My favourite graves now haunted by maybes, my firework park now the ash paths of my last lover's stomping ground, even the shoreline, blown to glass and fading hatbox photographs. So I leave myself the observatory. And Paris. Its creaking wink, future romance rusting on the banks, waiting for someone to take me by the shoulders and press stars to my eyes, someone to flip the switch and turn the Milky Way to a river of light bulbs, someone to delight in my gasp as Andromeda swirls in her ball gown, someone who does not know my first degree was actually astronomy, someone who makes me forget, for once, that I've seen it all before.
Cheerio.